December 10th, 1941. The phone rang at the bedside of the British Prime Minister. It was the sort of ringing that cuts through the silence of a house that is already holding its breath. Winston Churchill was in bed, working on papers, the smoke of his cigar drifting toward the ceiling. It had been 3 days since Pearl Harbor. He knew the war was now a world war, and he had slept soundly the night before, comforted by the fact that the United States was finally in the fight. He picked up the receiver. On the other end was the First Sea Lord, Admiral Sir Dudley Pound. His voice was odd. It wasn't the usual crisp military tone of the Admiralty. It sounded hollow. It sounded like a man who had seen a ghost. "Prime Minister," Pound said. He coughed, a dry, nervous sound. "I have to report to you that the Prince of Wales and the Repulse have both been sunk by the Japanese. We think by aircraft. Tom Phillips is drowned." Churchill didn't answer immediately. He couldn't. The receiver felt heavy in his hand. He asked, "Are you sure it's true?" "There is no doubt," Pound replied. "No doubt at all." Churchill hung up the phone. He sat there, staring at the wall. In his memoirs, he would later write that in all the war, he never received a more direct shock. You have to understand what those names meant. The Prince of Wales wasn't just a ship. It was the brand new, modern pride of the Royal Navy. It was the ship that had fought the Bismarck. It was the ship that had carried Churchill across the Atlantic to meet Roosevelt. It was unsinkable. And the Repulse was a fast battle cruiser, a veteran of the seas. Together they were Force Z. They were the iron fist sent to Singapore to stop the Japanese Empire in its tracks. And in 90 minutes, less time than it takes to watch a football match, they had both been erased from the surface of the ocean. Churchill later wrote, "Over all this vast expanse of waters, Japan was supreme, and we everywhere were weak and naked." This wasn't just a defeat. It was the moment the British Empire realized it was no longer invincible. It was the moment the rules of warfare changed forever. Before we go into next, I want to ask you to subscribe right now and become a member of this channel. Do it so you never miss moments like this, moments where we tell the truth in a calm, clear way. If thousands of you are watching, I hope all 1,000 of you join us, because this community is growing and your presence truly matters here. So to understand the sheer magnitude of Churchill's shock, you have to understand the gamble he had taken. Sending Force Z to Singapore was Churchill's idea, and it was a controversial one. The Admiralty had opposed it. They wanted to keep the ships safe in the Indian Ocean, protecting the trade routes. But Churchill believed in the power of the, quote, fleet in being. He believed that the mere presence of 2 massive capital ships would terrify the Japanese. He thought that if the Prince of Wales showed its flag in Singapore, Japan would hesitate to launch invasion convoys. It was a strategy built on prestige, intimidation, and the old-world belief that nothing could touch a battleship. But there was a fatal flaw in this plan, one that haunts military historians to this day. A modern fleet requires air cover. A battleship without an aircraft carrier is just a very large, very expensive target. The original plan had been to send the aircraft carrier times HMS Indomitable along with the battleships. But in a twist of cruel fate, the Indomitable had run aground in the Caribbean during its shakedown cruise. It was in dry dock for repairs. So Churchill made the decision to send the ships anyway. He sent them naked. He argued that the Japanese Air Force was inferior, that their pilots were second-rate, and that the ships' own anti-aircraft guns would be enough to fight off any attack. This was hubris. It was racism. The British leadership simply did not believe that Asian pilots could fly complex torpedo attacks against moving targets. When the ships arrived in Singapore on December 2nd, the press hailed them as saviors. Champagne was corked. The morale of the colony skyrocketed. They looked at those massive 14-inch guns and felt safe. But Churchill, sitting in London, was playing poker with chips he couldn't afford to lose. He was betting that the reputation of the Royal Navy was stronger than the physics of modern aerial warfare. He was wrong. And the price of that error was about to be paid in blood and oil on the South China Sea. The man commanding Force Z was Admiral Sir Tom Phillips. He was a brilliant administrator, a man known for his intellect, nicknamed Tom Thumb because of his short stature. But Phillips had a dangerous blind spot. He was of the old school. He did not believe, genuinely did not believe, that bombers could sink a maneuvering battleship at sea. He had looked at the data from the early years of the war and concluded that while ships were vulnerable in port, like at Taranto or Pearl Harbor, a ship at full speed, twisting and turning, was safe. He thought the bombers would miss, or his anti-aircraft guns would shred them. On December 8th, just after Pearl Harbor, reports came in that Japanese transport ships were landing troops at Kota Bharu in northern Malaya. Phillips had a choice. He could stay in Singapore, effectively doing nothing, or he could sail north and smash the invasion fleet. He was a fighting admiral. He chose to sail. He asked the Royal Air Force in Singapore for air cover. He wanted fighters to protect him. The RAF commander had to tell him the hard truth. They had virtually no fighters available. The few Buffalo fighters they had were outclassed and needed to protect the airfields. Phillips decided to go anyway. He planned a surprise attack. He would sail north under radio silence, hit the Japanese transports at dawn on the 10th, and race back before the Japanese bombers could find him. It was a bold plan. It might have worked. But the Japanese were not the second-rate enemy Churchill and Phillips imagined. They were highly trained, disciplined, and they had a secret weapon. The Mitsubishi G-4M Betty and G-3M Nell bombers. These planes had immense range and carried torpedoes specifically designed to run shallow in harbor waters or strike fast at sea. As Force Z steamed north into the monsoon rain, they were walking into a trap. The Japanese had submarine pickets watching the coast. They had reconnaissance planes sweeping the ocean. And in Saigon, 500 miles away, 88 bombers were sitting on the runway, engines warming up, waiting for the call. The morning of December 10th broke with clear skies and calm seas, the worst possible weather for a fleet trying to hide. Admiral Phillips had already turned back south. He had realized he couldn't reach the invasion beaches without being spotted, so he decided to investigate a report of landings at Kuantan. It was a false report, likely a diversion, but it drew him into the kill zone. At 10:15 a.m., the radar on the day's Prince of Wales picked up a blip, then another, then the sky filled. These weren't a few stray biplanes. This was the Kanoya, Genzan, and Mihoro Air Corps, the elite of the Japanese Naval Air Service. They attacked with surgical precision. They didn't just swarm, they coordinated. The high-level bombers came first, dropping their payloads from 10,000 feet. The true Tartagee Repulse, commanded by Captain William Tennant, was a nimble ship for her size. Tennant was a master seaman. He combed the tracks of the bombs, swinging the massive ship hard to port and starboard. Water geysers erupted all around him, but the Tooterston ones took only one minor hit. For a moment, it looked like Admiral Phillips was right. The ships could dodge. But then the torpedo bombers arrived. They came in low, skimming the waves at 200 feet. This was a pincer attack. They split up, attacking from the front and the sides simultaneously. This is the nightmare of a naval captain. If you turn to comb the tracks of one torpedo, you expose your broadside to another. The British gunners opened fire. The sky turned black with flak. Pom-pom guns pounded, heavy anti-aircraft shells burst, creating a wall of steel. But the Japanese pilots didn't flinch. They flew straight through the barrage, dropping their torpedoes at point-blank range. Captain Tennant, on the Repulse, managed to dodge an incredible 19 torpedoes. He was performing miracles on the bridge, shouting orders, spinning the 30,000-ton vessel like a destroyer. But on the flagship, the 20 Prince of Wales, luck had run out. A Japanese pilot, likely Lieutenant Sadao Takai, dropped a torpedo that didn't hit the side of the ship, it hit the stern. The torpedo that struck the 2 Prince of Wales was the lucky shot that changes history. It hit the port outer propeller shaft right where it exited the hull. The explosion didn't just blow a hole in the ship. It snapped the spinning steel shaft. The momentum of the engine whipped the broken metal around like a flail, tearing open the bulkheads and destroying the watertight seals all the way up the shaft tunnel. Instantly, thousands of tons of water rushed into the engine rooms. The electrical generators failed. The steering gear jammed. The ship took on a heavy list and lost half her power. The lights went out. The ammunition hoists for the anti-aircraft guns stopped working. In seconds, the pride of the Royal Navy, the ship that was supposed to intimidate an empire, was reduced to a crippling limp. She couldn't steer. She couldn't shoot back effectively. She was a sitting duck. Admiral Phillips hoisted the signal, not under control. It was a signal of despair. On the repulse, Captain Tennant saw the flagship listing and slowed down to help. It was a gallant, noble gesture, and it was a death sentence. By slowing down to protect his crippled admiral, Tennant made himself an easy target. The Japanese pilots saw the wounded giant. They circled back. They concentrated their fire. They came in from all directions, knowing the Trades Prince of Wales couldn't turn, and its guns were silent. They put torpedo after torpedo into her hull. 3 hits. 4 hits. Then, they turned on the propulse. Tennant couldn't dodge them all anymore. A torpedo caught the torpulse amidships. Then, another. Then, 3 more, in rapid succession. The ship shuddered violently. The intercoms went dead. Captain Tennant knew it was over. He ordered all hands on deck. He told his men, "You have fought a good fight. Good luck, and God be with you." The end came with terrifying speed. The Repulse, a veteran of the First World War, rolled over and sank at 12:33 p.m. It had taken less than an hour from the first torpedo. Men slid down the side of the hull into the oil-slicked water. The Prince of Wales lasted a little longer. She was a modern battleship, designed with extensive watertight compartments, but the damage was too catastrophic. At 1:18 p.m., the unthinkable happened. The brand-new flagship capsized to port and slipped beneath the waves. Admiral Phillips and Captain Leach of the Prince of Wales chose to go down with their ship. They stood on the bridge, dressed in their pristine white uniforms, and saluted as the water rose to meet them. It was a scene from a bygone era, a final act of Victorian chivalry, in a war that had become brutally industrial. In the water, hundreds of survivors struggled to stay afloat. They were covered in thick, black fuel oil that burned their eyes and lungs. They waited for the Japanese planes to strafe them, to machine gun them in the water, as was common in this brutal war. But the Japanese did something unexpected. The pilots flew low over the survivors. They didn't fire. Some of them waved. One pilot even threw a wreath of flowers onto the water. They had achieved a victory so total, so absolute, that they felt a moment of warriors' respect for the men they had defeated. The destroyers Electra, Suntime, Vampire moved in to pick up the survivors. They pulled 2,000 men from the sea, but 840 British sailors lay dead at the bottom of the Gulf of Thailand. With them lay the illusion of British naval supremacy. The force that was supposed to save Singapore was gone. The door to the east was wide open. Let's return to that bedroom in London. Winston Churchill is now fully awake, the phone back in its cradle. He is staring at the ceiling. For Churchill, this wasn't just a military defeat. It was a personal failure. He had bullied the Admiralty into sending those ships. He had dismissed the warnings about air power. He had believed that the sheer majesty of a battleship was enough. He wrote, "I turned over and twisted in bed, the full horror of the news sinking in upon me." Consider the strategic map that was now burning in his mind. The American fleet at Pearl Harbor was burning ruin. The British fleet in the east was at the bottom of the sea. There was literally nothing left. From India to Hawaii, the Japanese Navy could go anywhere it wanted. They could invade Australia, they could strike Ceylon, they could take Singapore. The phrase he used, "weak and naked," is one of the most vulnerable things a wartime leader has ever admitted. Churchill was a man of rhetoric, of defiance. "We shall fight on the beaches." But here, in private, he felt exposed. The shield of the Royal Navy, which had protected Britain for centuries, had been pierced by a technology he had underestimated. He had to go to the House of Commons the next day and explain this. He had to stand before the MPs and tell them that the ships everyone had cheered for just days ago were gone. He described the mood in the House as, quote, "restless." That is an understatement. There was fury. There was panic. People realized that Singapore, the Gibraltar of the East, was going to fall. And they were right. Without the Navy to stop the transports, the Japanese army rolled down the Malayan Peninsula and took Singapore 2 months later, capturing 80,000 British troops in the worst disaster in British military history. The sinking of the Shin's Prince of Wales and the Repulse was the end of the battleship era. For hundreds of years, the ship with the biggest guns was the king of the ocean. In 90 minutes off the coast of Kuantan, that crown was passed to the airplane and the aircraft carrier. Churchill's shock was the shock of a man watching the world change faster than he could comprehend. He learned the hard lesson that hubris is the most dangerous enemy of all. You cannot fight the future with the weapons of the past. You cannot intimidate a technologically superior enemy with prestige alone. The silence of those ships, lying upside down in the mud of the South China Sea, spoke louder than any of Churchill's speeches. It said that the world was new, and it was terrifying. The disaster of Force Z forces us to ask, what are the battleships of today? What are the expensive, prestigious, unsinkable systems we rely on that might be rendered obsolete in 90 minutes by a new technology we don't respect? Churchill ignored the warning signs, and 840 men paid the price. If you found this story compelling, if you want to understand the history that shapes our present, please subscribe to Hidden Horizon Hub. We are building a library of the most critical moments in human history, and we want you to be part of it. Click that button, leave a comment about what you think Churchill should have done, and I'll see you in the next video.